Mr. John Tagnino, Father Joseph McShane, Reverend Father O'Hare, Dr. Nancy Bush, Dr. Henry Schwalbenberg. Sorry, just came from China. Father Patrick Sullivan, Father William Cogan, Father Thomas Murphy, Mr. Stephen Friedman, Mr. Joel Reidenberg, members of the official and accompanying delegations, faculty, students, administrative staff of Fordham University, members of the Filipino community present, honored guests, mga minamahal ko pong kababayan, good morning to each and everyone. In 1946, the year the Independent Republic of the Philippines was born, Father Robert Gannon rechristened these 19 steps above Edwards Parade, the Terrace of the Presidents. Into these steps have been carved the names of the heads of state upon whom your university has bestowed honorary doctorates. These names include 7 of my predecessors, including that of my mother. I am struck by the symbolism of Fordham's tradition of literally carving in stone the names of leaders upon whom you have conferred honorary doctorates. Memorialized in this manner for all time, these names serve as proof positive or proof negative of this university's considered judgment in bestowing this honor. Hopefully, I will be in the first category. It serves as a permanent reminder that the verdict of history on those who have been accorded this distinction will neither be deferred nor ignored. Now, as it is my turn to accept an honorary doctorate from you, I would like to speak of what brought me to this place. As President of the Philippines, I am here to represent the people who were not given, but rather who gave themselves a fresh start. In the days of my father's imprisonment, an American official made a cruel remark that went around the world as follows, and please pardon my language. The problem with the Philippines is it has 40 million cowards and 1 SOB. That official never had to live in a regime where one man was not only despotic judge, jury, and executioner, but also had the bayonets to impose his whims and will. In a regime where the law is nothing more than the will of one man, it is perhaps understandable that people tend to bow to unlimited authority out of a desire for self-preservation. The will of the dictator was founded, after all, on fear, and there were many who found it advantageous to be instruments of the apparatus of intimidation and corruption. It is true, there were those who resisted from the start. It is just as true that as time passed, the number who resisted grew, challenged by the examples of conscientious resistance to the dictatorship. The loss of man, or as we tragically experienced during martial law, the loss of one man, ultimately cannot prevail against the power of an unfettered conscience. To obey your conscience is to make yourself immune to the temptations of power and to inoculate yourself against fear. By asserting the primacy of conscience, you can discover or rediscover the antidote to dictatorship. You discover that you are not alone. When my father was murdered, "Ninoy, you are not alone," precisely became the rallying cry of my countrymen. Within 3 years, Filipinos from all walks of life defied truncheons and tanks, armed only with a conscientious objection to dictatorship. And literally, a death-defying desire to uphold the principle that our social contract cannot tolerate anyone being above the law. United, our people made a stand in the main avenue of Metro Manila called EDSA, just as their countrymen did throughout the Philippines, forcing the dictator, his family, and retainers to flee like the thieves they were into the night. Twice in 1965 and in 1969, under democratic circumstances, Ferdinand Marcos had taken the oath every one of his predecessors since 1935 had taken: to preserve and defend the Constitution, execute its laws, do justice to every man, and consecrate himself to the service of the nation. We now know how he conspired to do the opposite, manufacturing consent for a new constitution in 1973 and adding insult to injury by repeating that oath twice more, in 1981 after a sham election and in 1986 after attempting to rob the people of the mandate they conferred on my mother. The difference was that in 1981, most oppositionists had decided to boycott Marcos's simulated election, while in 1986, Filipinos took the dictatorship head-on and contested the snap election. In this manner, democracy was restored by the ways of democracy. And when the dictatorship inevitably proved itself incapable of winning even a rigged election, my mother took the same oath as her predecessors, but upon the basis of the will of the people, while pointedly ignoring the so-called Constitution of Mr. Marcos. A little over a year after that, Filipinos overwhelmingly ratified the new Constitution, which has endured for a quarter century as a bulwark against the return of tyranny. The maintenance of democracy has not been easy, but it has been a task to which my countrymen have rededicated themselves time and again, regardless of the desire of some of our leaders to return to the days of impunity and plunder. While far from perfect in its implementation, our basic law has endured because of our peoples proving time and again that the vow they made, never again after the dictator fled, would neither be taken back nor taken away. It is that determination not to surrender to apathy and not to allow ourselves to become atomized prisoners of despair and intimidation that led me to where I am now. Every one of the students here knows Lord Acton's observation that power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. My predecessor, facing questions on her legitimacy, focused on keeping herself in power to the exclusion of all other considerations. In both cases, those who had grown fat and corrupt on the corrupt status quo funded and supported efforts to subvert our democracy. And in both cases, despite it all, the Filipino renewed their social contract with each other and stood firm in their democratic ideals. I will give you a simple demonstration of the task that was before us. As we renew our institutions to strengthen the principle of a nation of laws and not merely the whims of men. The sight of officials with sirens blaring and armed escorts bristling with guns had grown to epidemic proportions prior to my taking office. Public servants had literally become masters of the streets. My first act as chief executive was to dispense with the use of sirens and to prohibit their use for other officials except for those entitled by law. And to furthermore prove my seriousness by leading by example, to symbolize a change in the mindset of officials from behaving as masters to being authentic public servants. I'm happy to say that this decision has been accompanied by a fierce insistence on the part of my countrymen not to tolerate any violations of this policy. It is in small things that big things are accomplished, where the population not only abides by the law but insists on its implementation. There you have a people truly secure in their freedoms. We have gone far beyond this first step in the first year of my administration. We have put forward legislation to strengthen our witness protection program and accord whistleblowers protection. We have raised the salaries of the judiciary and the prosecutors of the state. We have committed to the upholding of human rights by the military and the police. We have filed cases against tax evaders, and we have scrutinized the finances and operations of government to curb waste and bring the resources of the state directly to our people. At the heart of all of this is not my will or the hard work of my cabinet, but the resolve of my countrymen. If we are indeed our brother's keeper, then government is too important a task to leave strictly in the hands of officials. Throughout the Philippines, volunteer organizations, civic associations, non-governmental organizations have taken to working with government to scrutinize, suggest, and partner with local and national agencies to cut red tape, make policies relevant, and achieve, most importantly, inclusive growth, where all citizens have the opportunity to achieve their fullest potential. After a decade of political turbulence, the Philippines has entered into an era of renewed stability and confidence. The Filipino people have truly discovered that power is theirs, that the people power that face down tanks and artillery, truncheons and tear gas can be the dynamo for progress and the lasting mortar for a government that applies its laws fairly. While I am the instrument of the people's will, I too have my own ambition, and that is that with